So hello everybody, good evening from KL, Malaysia, and today's our final session. Can you imagine how fast time flies when you're having fun? Okay, so hopefully that what we've done over the last 6 days and today will give you further confidence to go in for the exam. All that is left to do now is just practice. So we want to go through the IESBA code, and the reason for that is because last round we had many students, but only 2 students in Singapore said that they had this question on the IESBA code, but just a small part for about 8 marks or so, which means that the rest of the world needs to see this topic. So it is still very important. There's an article found in the ACCA website under AAA on the IESBA exposure draft. Okay, so let's just go through the key proposals. I've made it slightly easier, and I have taken into consideration what kind of question came out last round. So the first area of the proposal is the changes to the definition of the fundamental principles of objectivity and professional behavior. And this came out last round. Okay, so you need to know the current definition, and you also need to know the new definition. So the old definition is kind of simple. The new definition still has got the same elements inside. It has got bias, conflict of interest, undue influence to override professional or business judgment. That means in objectivity, we shouldn't allow this to happen. And here, we still have the blue and the pink and the brown, yeah? The only difference here is that instead of starting off by saying negatively that not allowing this to happen, not allowing bias or conflict of interest or undue influence of others to override professional or business judgment, this time they are putting it in the positive sense by saying you need to exercise professional and business judgment. Last time was don't allow anything to screw up the business judgment. This time they're saying just apply that business judgment without being compromised by bias, conflict of interest, or undue influence. But they added on these words in blue, including undue reliance on other people, on individuals, organizations, or even technology. Now, on the area of technology, the thing that comes to mind is data analytics. So data analytics is a very important part of your syllabus. Now it's been included inside, meaning that it is not just a current issue, but it is part of the syllabus itself. So it cannot have undue reliance on even data analytics. No matter how fantastic data analytics is, there should not be undue reliance. Okay, so the first difference is that the way the word objectivity has been defined, previously it used to be more from a negative standpoint. That means don't allow this to happen. Here is we're saying positively exercise professional or business judgment without being compromised by those 3 areas. Okay, now you've got this word bias, and in the IESBA code now, they are introducing this concept and explaining a little bit more. And here it deals with unconscious bias. Okay, sometimes we do have that unconscious bias, and they give you an illustrative list. So what could happen this time around is that the examiner could ask you maybe for 4 examples of unconscious bias. That's always a possibility. Or maybe give you a scenario and ask you to identify the different biases that are there. So you need to know what they are. It's not just a matter of memorizing a list. You need to know what they are. So this is unconscious bias. That means we don't even realize this is happening. Okay, so we're starting off with something called anchoring bias. So a picture of an anchor. It simply means that we always cling to the first piece of information that we get. Like, for example, here, maybe you've got a girlfriend and you know, this girl that you like very much. And then I don't know whether you can see or not. Is the font too small? Can you see? It says here that this guy is saying her parents lived into their 90s, and she is likely to live like that as well because she's got good genes. She's got the same genes as her parents. So this guy got the first information as being information regarding that girl's parents. Okay, and give you another example here. Let's have a look at the first picture here. It says here, the best product in the industry, we're selling it and it's for $290. Get this. And there's a button here for action. And that's not the way to do marketing. The way to do marketing is to do it this way, to show you the higher price first. Why? Because the marketeers are taking advantage of anchoring bias. You will always see that 400 first before you see the 290. And therefore, when you see the 400, you are more likely to buy, seeing that 290 is significantly lower than 400. So you may not realize it, but we're all victims of marketing ploys as a result of this anchoring bias that we didn't even realize that we had. You know, when you go shopping and you look at something and then you turn around and say, hey, no, I saw the first thing out there, it was so much cheaper, it was nicer, kind of a thing. So we are always anchoring it to the first piece of information that we get. And as auditors, there is always that first piece of information that we get, and we need to be careful that it does not block us from appreciating the next information that we get. Okay, so it is hindering us. All these biases are bad for us, okay, even though we don't realize it. So we've got the anchor here. And then we've got automation bias. Automation, I was just thinking of automobiles, and I was thinking about two cars mating, automating. I mean, just helping to remember the points down here. And then I thought of these two guys. Have you seen these Pixar cars? Yeah, you got Sally and Lightning McQueen as well. Do you guys like animated movies? Yeah. So that is helping me to remember the automation bias. And what is automation bias as far as we're concerned? We're thinking more about data analytics. So here is a bias or a tendency to favor whatever information that comes out of the computer, comes out of the software, more than what you see yourself. There can be that tendency that you trust the information from the computer system, whether it is the client system or whether it is data analytics itself, your own data analytics itself, there is a tendency to trust it more. Okay, then after that, we go to the next section here. So it's also bias here, but I group these two together using this picture and that anchor. So these two people are, well, these two cars are in love, and they've got, they're anchored together so that they don't split up. Then you've got the other one. One is called groupthink. Groupthink is just the opposite of overconfidence bias. Overconfidence bias is you are Superman. You think your ability is so great and you are able to make that risk assessment by yourself. Groupthink is that you are in a group. I mean, you've got a picture of blind leading the blind. Sometimes when you're in the group, you do not want to say the opposite thing from the rest of the people because you would look like a sore thumb. So when maybe the manager says something, you're like, yeah, I agree. But actually inside your heart, you don't agree. So they're just saying, watch out for this bias, that without realizing it, you might just agree with your manager just so that you look like you are part of the group and you're not sticking out like a sore thumb. Okay, so one is groupthink, the other one is solo. So we're saying that this one is also bad, where you go into an audit and you think that you can make the assessment of risk by yourself, that you're very good at it. Maybe you do have the experience, but you just got to watch out for it, okay? Then after that, you have got 4 areas here. So we've already covered 4, and now we've covering the other 4, and we can arrange it in the form of an acronym. We've got CARS here again. Okay, so just like the picture up here, a bunch of cars, down here we've got a bunch of cars as well. I'm just trying to find a way so that you can organize the ideas in your head. But just because you memorize them doesn't mean that you can write them out. So you need to practice that as well. Make sure that you understand the concept. Then you've got confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a tendency to place more weight on the information that corroborates an existing belief. So here you have got your belief inside here, and even when you see other information outside, only the information that coincides with your beliefs you will accept, and whatever are factual out there and it doesn't tie up with your beliefs, you are going to reject. And that's terrible because those are facts. So you need to be aware, or we all need to be aware of confirmation bias as well. All right, because it confirms our beliefs and therefore we stick to it, totally disregarding the information that we have outside there. Then there's this thing called availability bias. We tend to place more weight on our own experiences, that we have faced recently. Here, for example, the whole blue circle is information out there, but when you look at that information, you can only relate it to the information that you have recently experienced. Like, for example, you just finished a client that had a fraud. And then when you go into the next client, you're looking for the fraud as well. Or you had a client where the director was not very honest with you. And then when you go into the next client, you look at the next guy and you're thinking the same thing as well. I know I had that problem. Okay. I mean, now when I read it, I realize that, okay, but that's a bit of a problem because the next client could be totally innocent and you could not be looking at the information because you are so biased based on your past experience or the most recent experience. Usually that experience is pretty bad experience. Okay, representation bias here is that you tend to be stereotyping. You know, like how some people say, all ladies are bad drivers. Yeah, for example, I think that's such a horrible thing to say. All right, I'm not that a bad driver. I mean, I've had a few accidents, true, but that I was learning. But it's not because I was a bad driver, okay? Or like, for example, here, when you see a beggar, you think that it must be poor. I mean, that's your first thought. So you are stereotyping that all beggars are poor. But you know what? When I first started working, of course, your first salary is usually very, very little, right? And just enough to last you to the end of the month. So I remember going to the bank, and last time we didn't have ATM machines, so you had to queue up to get your money. And I was queuing up, and I saw this beggar on my way to the bank. But I had been shopping, and then by the time I reached the bank and I queued up, this beggar was queuing in front of me, and oh my goodness, when the beggar opened up the passbook, the savings book, that beggar had 1,000 times more money than I had. And after that day, I'm thinking that being a beggar is like a profession, you know. And in KL, there's one place where they say that the beggar is dropped off by his driver in a Mercedes-Benz. And that's his career. Can you imagine? So we have got this kind of stereotyping bias that we have got. So representation bias is just stereotyping. Just think about that word, stereotyping, where you say that this kind of people, they're always lazy. This kind of people are always crooks. This kind of people are always angry, or something like that. Yeah? Selective perception is where you choose what you want to believe. So this little cartoon here puts it really well. So this dad is trying to, encourage his son to go study. He said, exams are closing in. It's high time you started studying. And the little boy says, high time. Got it. But actually the dad was saying it's about time that you start studying. But that fella saw the word high time and he went to look for drugs so that he can get high. Can you see that? Sometimes we also do that. Yeah, we look for particular words and then we jump on it, just like you do when you're looking at an exam question. Yeah, just because you see the word matters, you think it's a matters and evidence question. Just because you see the word implications, it's an NSOB question. So don't jump the gun. So all these biases are actually biases faced by the auditor, and the IESBA code asks you to be aware of it, because if you're not aware of it, you are not going to be objective. So this time around, you can get an exam question on objectivity focused on the area of bias, but I don't think the examiner is going to give you 8 marks for all the biases. I don't think. What the examiner could do is, examiner could say, give 4 examples of bias other than automation bias. So the examiner would look at all the different biases and find out which one is the easiest one to remember, and then turn around and say, except for that one, you do the rest. Got to be ready for anything. Okay, so that is on the area of objectivity. So next one is on the area of professional behavior, where the definition has changed to make it a better definition. So here the original definition, or the current definition, there are 2 parts here: to comply with relevant laws and regulations, and not to do anything. It says to avoid any action that discredits a profession. So the proposed revision here, you still have got the brown and you still have got the purple. The difference here is they've added on this thing about public interest. Now, when it comes to public interest, we as auditors are already familiar with the issue of public interest. Public interest means to do the right thing, okay? So as auditors, we're thinking about the audit, we are already familiar with this issue of public interest because we already have got the revised ISA 250 on NOCLA. Yeah, that happened a couple of years ago. So we're already very comfortable with that issue of public interest, that when there's a NOCLA, we need to take into consideration if there's no mandatory obligation to report it to an outsider, we need to consider whether public interest is at stake. And if the public is going to be harmed, then we need to report it to an outsider. Okay, so we're already familiar. But the only thing is that the IESBA code is saying auditors are fine. They've got ISA 250. But what if you're doing a non-audit assignment? ISA 250 is for an audit. Then for a non-audit assignment, do we still consider public interest? Or if you are not in the audit firm and you are in business, do you still need to consider public interest? So the revised IESBA code, the exposure draft, saying this issue of public interest, the auditors are all okay with it, but we need to open it up. So this topic would be very important for people in SPL, doing SPL. So we are already familiar with this. Okay, so whenever there is a problem, an issue relating to public interest, then we always need to put the public interest on top. But if not, if there's no issue at all, nobody is harmed, then that is what your picture will look like. Self-interest, we take care of ourselves, we take care of our firm, we take care of the profession. But the minute there is someone that is harmed in the business, then we've got to put public interest first before ourselves, our firm, and the profession. Okay? That we already know from doing ISA 250. So those are the two areas, objectivity, and here you've got the professional behavior. Let's move on to integrity. Now, integrity, there is a slight change again in the definition, and the emphasis now is the determination to act appropriately. So that's the current definition, which you already know. And here is especially standing one's ground when facing pressure to do otherwise. Like sometimes you've got the exam question where they say that if you do not provide a favorable assurance on the KPI, we will put the audit out to tender. So to maintain integrity is to turn around and say, no, thank you. I'm not giving in to your bullying. I'm not being intimidated by you. Okay. Now, this example here, this one happened in 2014. You've got this guy named Amjad Rihan. He was working in EY in Dubai, and he was auditing this company called Kaloti. Apparently, it is a gold refiner. And when he was doing the audit, he was looking at the numbers, and the numbers looked as if it was money laundering that was happening because some of the numbers did not make sense. So he went to the partners and he said, this is money laundering going on. We need to make the report. Okay, so he probably made the report to the money laundering reporting officer, but the money laundering reporting officer, under pressure of the partners in EY, did not forward that report to the financial intelligence unit in that country. And what happened was, in this case, EY did not report the activity. In fact, EY went back to the client and helped them to cover up the crime. That's not that's not maintaining integrity. Okay? And they actually helped the client to cover up the whole thing. And they not only did that, but because this guy was making so much noise, they sacked him. That's not a very nice thing to do, is it? Anyway, he came back and he couldn't find a job because EY made sure that his reputation was totally destroyed. And so he sued EY, and recently, I think it was last year, that EY was ordered to pay him 10.8 million in damages. I think it's a very small amount here, considering the amount of suffering that he went through and how his marriage broke up and stuff like that. Okay, so he stood up for the right thing. He was determined to act appropriately, even though it was a difficult situation. All right, my hat's off to this guy. All right, so the courts will ordered that EY should pay him 10.8 million. It says here April 2020. Got the news from BBC. So those are the three areas: objectivity, integrity, professional behavior, where there have been changes. Okay. Now, there is another thing called the inquiring mind. Now, as auditors, we are very familiar with QBC. We've got so many exam questions. And what is the definition of skepticism? It is a questioning mind, being alert to circumstances that might indicate the possibility of fraud or error, and a critical assessment of audit evidence. So this definition of professional skepticism actually has got an audit slant to it. So IESBA is saying, okay, the auditors are behaving in a skeptical way, but that is only for an audit. So here you have got in an audit firm, when you carry out an audit, you make use of the definition of QBC, the definition of skepticism to do your audit, which is fine. But then when you do a non-audit assignment, then you don't have a definition at all. Because the original definition of skepticism is more for the audit. Therefore now, IESBA is saying, even for the audit firm, when you're doing a non-audit assignment or you are in business where you are an accountant, we don't call it professional skepticism because IESBA has said the word professional skepticism is only reserved for the use of for an audit or any kind of assurance engagement. But for anybody else, we have to have an inquiring mind. For everybody else. So I put a diagram down here. Inquiring mind includes for auditors as well, but then we already have that questioning mind, isn't it? Yeah, so it's the same thing. So what we're saying here is for the auditors, there is already proper guidance, but for the rest of the accountants, there's insufficient guidance. So the IESBA code wants to pick that up. So this will be important for those of you going in for the SBL as well. So having an inquiring mind. So here, exposure draft is saying that the professional accountant should exercise professional judgment, have an inquiring mind, and also use a reasonable and informed third-party test. So let's have a look at that for a minute. You know, we are supposed to be independent and be seen to be independent. So how do you know that you are seen to be independent? Maybe you are independent in your mind, but how are you seen to be independent? The only way to be seen to be independent is before you do something, always look to see whether a reasonable and informed third party, whether when they look at you, they're going to think that you are not independent. So IESBA code wants you to consider that. Like, for example, if an outsider, a reasonable and informed third party, sees the client give you a cup of coffee, is he going to think that the client is bribing you? No, everybody drinks coffee. Yeah, and I'm sure the auditor can buy his own cup of coffee as well. But what if an outsider sees the client giving you a diamond ring? What will they say? Even though you're independent in your mind, but to others, they are looking like, no, this auditor is definitely bought over by the client or something like that. So just remember this, the reasonable and informed third-party test. That's how we need to decide on the severity of the threat. Do you remember we were doing TSASA yesterday? So we've got the threat and the severity of the threat. So when you look at the severity of the threat, we're not just looking at the ACCA code alone, but we're looking at the threat from the eyes of a reasonable and informed third party. If they knew about it, what would they think? Yeah? All right, moving down further. So the new introductory material here is the issue of the public interest, but there's another part here where the code seems to say that we're looking more at the spirit of the code and not just with the letter of the code. Letter means we're looking at the words in the code, whether the code says can or cannot. Yeah, but you need to look at the spirit of the code as well. Let me give you an example. You know, when the fees from a client, a pie, are more than 15% for 2 consecutive years, the first thing that we do is go and inform those charged with governance, right? So the code says 15%. But what if when you do the calculation, it comes out to 14.99%? Then what do? Are you going to say that it is 15%, we're not yet 15%, so we don't inform those charged with governance? Then if you look at the spirit of the code, well, I think you should. As you are moving up and up and up, nearing 15%, I think those charged with governance should already be informed, that they should be aware that this is happening. So to consider not only the letter of the code, but also the spirit. Then the IESBA code also says that it is important to have a positive internal organizational culture. Now, from a business point of view, a business outside the client point of view, if you look at the COSO framework, you know, the internal controls that you did when you were doing F8 or something like that, or AA, the COSO framework for internal controls. You've got 5 categories of internal control, right? You've got the control environment, the risk assessment processes, the control activity, the information communication and monitoring right on top. You know, the pyramid, yeah, the COSO pyramid. Sure, you already know that. But for a company, we also emphasize the control environment. The control environment is like the foundation of the company. If the foundation of the company is not strong, you can have all the internal controls you want. You can have your whole pyramid, but you know what? When no one is looking, the pyramid will come toppling down. So the control environment is the solid framework. If you have your building is built on a solid foundation, then even if there's an earthquake, it is unlikely to topple. But if your foundation is bad, even with a light breeze, your building will come toppling down, as if your house is made up of cards or something like that. So this is the acronym that I use for control environment for the AA kids, and I'm just going to run through them. I'm sure you already know them. So the first C is communication and enforcement of integrity and ethical values. Communication. Yeah. So within the audit firm, there needs to be that communication of ethical values to the staff on a regular basis. So how does a company do it? The company will usually have a corporate code of ethics. So the audit firm should have a corporate code of ethics as well. Yeah. The second one is human resource policies and procedures. So these kind of procedures will be like not to tolerate bad behavior or unprofessional behavior. Then the human resource people can take action against you if you do not behave in a professional way in the firm. We're talking about the work that you're doing, yeah? Then you've got organizational structure, where everybody knows exactly who is responsible for what. Just like in an organization, you've got an organizational structure, yeah? So in the audit firm, we also know who is responsible for what. Then P is participation of those charged with governance. And we're saying that in the audit firm, we need to have people who are charged with governance as well, but from a professional work point of view, all right? Like the partners, yeah? Then M stands for management philosophy and operating style. That one is like, you know, when we do fraud, we think about the word manipulation. So there, the management philosophy is that if we have to do it, we have to do it. If we have to manipulate to survive, we will manipulate. If we have to manipulate the sales figure in order to get a loan from the bank, we will do it. Why? Because if we don't do it and we don't get the loan, then we've got 1,000 men who are going to lose their jobs, and there will be no one in the family to take care of them. So management philosophy speaks about your basic attitude, your basic philosophy as to whether you are willing to do the wrong thing if you're pushed into a corner. Easier said than done, I know, but that speaks about management philosophy. Okay, so that needs to be there in the firm as well. And the next one is assignment of authority. Of course, that one is talking about the client company. Assignment of authority will be through the person's performance, that you're not going to assign authority just because it's your wife's nephew or something like that, right? And the last one is commitment to competence. So in a client company or in a private company, we've got something called a control environment, and they are bringing it into the IESBA code to say that if you do not have the same kind of control environment, of course they call it the organizational culture, then that's going to be a problem. Because no matter how you try and come up with policies in the audit firm, if your culture itself is not established as being an honest professional culture with the fundamental principles of PICO, yeah, you all know what the fundamental principles are, right? The fundamental principles are professional behavior, integrity, confidentiality, competence, and objectivity. Yeah? So if you don't have this strong control environment in the audit firm, when push comes to shove, that means when you are in a very tight corner, chances are you are going to give in to the client and end up doing the wrong thing. And this thing about doing the wrong thing, eventually it'll come out loud. There's no such thing as secrets anymore. Yeah, eventually it'll pop out somewhere. And when it does, the audit firm is going to get implicated as well. All right. Now it says here, these proposed changes are complementary to the work being carried out by the IAASB in relation to the new ISQM standards. There are 2 ISQM standards that are coming out. And these ISQM standards are going to replace ISQC1. So ISQM1 is like something like ISQC1, but the ISQM2 is more on engagement quality control reviews. So they're providing more guidance. All right, so they're changing that, but that's only proposed at the moment. It's only I think it's already an exposure draft, but it's not examinable yet. Yeah. Okay, the summary here. So you have got PICO here. Yeah, professional behavior, integrity, competence, confidentiality, and objectivity. I took this diagram off the internet of one of the slides by IESBA, and they did not arrange it in the form of acronyms. If I was doing it, I will arrange it in the form of acronyms. You know how I love acronyms, right? On the integrity part, the changes is the determination to act appropriately. On the area of objectivity, what was the new thing? Bias. And make sure that you don't have undue reliance on even technology. Then here on the area of professional behavior, always think about public interest. But as auditors, we already know that lah. Yeah? And the impact on technology, watch out for objectivity, because there we have got automation bias as well. The over-reliance on technology. But it also, there's an arrow there for competence as well. And here we're saying that for the professional accountant to be competent in this modern day, then you need to make sure that you're up to date on technology. Of course, if you're the audit firm, then it's more on the area of data analytics. Okay, so the only one that is untouched is the area of confidentiality. All right, but the rest of it has got some changes. So it's exactly the same. And under objectivity, it says here, the second one, expanded the factors that compromise the exercise of professional judgment to include technology. What are we talking about here? Automation bias. And the rest of it, you already know. Yeah, so I've tried to simplify it as much as possible and arrange it in a way that the exam question could come out. So all you have to do is read it, familiarize yourself with it, just note the new changes to the terminology and the definitions. Okay, we're done with that.